Hey gang, Ben here from Performer Magazine. Today we're taking a look at the MG12XU compact mixer from our friends at Yamaha. Now, we recently completed a 4-part series on getting better live sound on stage. You can find the links to those parts down below along with a downloadable PDF guide. But today I thought we would take a closer look at this mixer since Yamaha was nice enough to send it to us for that series, and just touch upon some simple basic things if you're just getting started using a live mixer for your band. All right. So tip number one as we pan across this Yamaha MG12XU mixer is simply this. Don't get intimidated by all the knobs and buttons and functions you might find on a mixer. No matter if it's a 12-channel unit like this or a 64-channel unit that you might find at the front of house at a large concert venue, they all work primarily in the same way, in that you have a series of inputs, series of outputs, channel strips that run from the top down to the bottom, and then some sort of master section. So let's take a look at each one briefly. If you've never used a mixer before, you're going to find your inputs up top. Now we have a series of combo jacks here that you can plug a microphone or line input into. Mic inputs here, some stereo line ins here in case you have drum loops or something on a laptop or maybe a CD player that you want to play along to in a rehearsal or live situation. Then you have some outputs here. You have aux ends, which you can send to some sort of monitoring system or outboard effects. You have your stereo outputs here, which can run to a power amp or powered monitors, powered loudspeakers for your PA system. You have a master section here that controls basically everything at once, and then you have individual channel strips for all your inputs. Let's say you're running a bunch of microphones in, or some line level signals in. Each one of these from top to bottom does essentially the same thing. You have your inputs, you have, let's get a closer look here, you have your gain stage, so you can pump that up, get the appropriate level for your mic so it's not clipping. You have a compressor on board, which is really nice if you want that sort of effect applied to your vocals or across your instrument ranges. You have a simple EQ, high, mids, lows, that you can boost or cut depending on your preferences. You have some adjustments here for aux 1 and aux 2. So your auxiliary sends can go to outboard effects units, they can go to stage monitors or in-ear monitor systems, whatever you might have set up that you need to route signals out of the board for. Then you have your panning here. You can go left, right, you even have a detent, so you can set it right in the middle and you can turn your channels on and off there. Then you just have your simple faders, so you can get your levels to the appropriate level that they need to be for a well-rounded show. Now, there's some other functions on the board, of course, but once you get the hang of what each channel strip does, it really uncomplicates what appears to be a much more complex system. So I hope that tip helps out. Let's move to number 2. Once you get a feel for what all of the individual channel strips do, and you get a better handle on how to mix your live show, one of the things you're going to want to do is start tweaking knobs, of course. But tip number 2 really focuses on one knob in particular, and that's the pan knob. So what the pan knob does, if you've ever used a stereo system before or DAW, moves the signal from the left channel to the right channel. Again, this is a stereo mixer, so you're going to be mixing for a left speaker and a right speaker. Here's the tip. Mix in mono if you can. And what we mean by that is set your levels to the middle position. Don't get fancy with hard panning left and right, especially for rehearsal facilities, practice spaces, smaller venues, or even medium-sized clubs, because what you're going to find is at home, stereo listening is fantastic. You can sit in a sweet spot, you can set up your speakers in a nice sounding room, you can have them pointed in the right direction, so you're sitting right in the middle and you're getting that great stereo image. Now, if you're like me and you've played live before, you know most venues are not ideal for stereo setup. So if you're hard panning something right and hard panning something else left and trying to get something subtle in a different channel, your listeners might not be hearing what you think they're hearing or what you might be hearing if you have an in-ear system, primarily because sound is tricky live. You might have people walking in front of your PA speakers and cutting out an entire right channel of audio information that someone on the left-hand side of the venue is not going to hear anymore. Likewise, you might have someone on the right side of the venue and maybe their hearing's not so great and they're not hearing what's coming out of the left PA speaker. So tip number 2 is simply this. Unless you're doing large stadium gigs and you have someone running front of house, try to mix everything straight up the middle. I think you're going to find you're going to get a much more even sound You're not going to have sounds that you want in your mix to go missing or unnoticed or not reach the appropriate people in the audience because you're trying to do things that for a lot of live venues just aren't going to work out that well, unfortunately. So let's move on to tip number 3. So tip number 3 is going to be a simple one as well. You can see in your channel strips here you have some settings for gain. So if you've got your microphones plugged in, you can adjust that accordingly so you're not clipping, which you definitely want to avoid. Now underneath that you have something called comp, and that's actually a compressor that's built into this mixing board. Now a lot of boards have this built in. You might also find outboard units for compression. And compression is a fantastic thing that can really glue vocal tracks together. It's a dynamic effect that will take highs and lows and kind of even them out volume-wise. It's something that is applied to a lot of vocal tracks in the studio. A lot of guitar tracks on country records are full of wonderful compression units that cost lots and lots of money. Fortunately, you have this board that has compression built in. Here's our tip. Less is more, especially if you're a dynamic live singer. What you're going to want to do is control the levels of your voice more so with microphone placement and technique rather than relying on a dynamic processor built into your mixer. Now, we have nothing against the compressors built in here. In fact, they're actually quite musical. We were pleased when we were testing this out for our 4-part series on Better Sound. Another plug, again, those links are down in the description. We were pleasantly surprised with the musicality of a lot of the onboard effects here, including the compressor. But back off a little bit on that, and I think you'll find that your vocals will actually come alive more dynamically than you may have been expecting. We're not saying don't use it. Again, we're saying roll back just a tad from where you may normally set your compressors, and then have your vocalist, he or she, experiment a little bit with their microphone placement and vocal techniques, singing into a microphone and dynamic movements with the microphone as opposed to relying on this sort of effect built in. The other problem is if you're cranking things up super high, especially on a board like this, what you're going to start to encounter is unwanted feedback, and that's not musical at all. So you might be going for a desired effect, and you might get the opposite of what you want. You might get a lot of noise and feedback entering your signal chain, whereas you really just want to control levels, and it's, again, sort of the opposite of what you want there. So our 3 main tips: don't be intimidated by the size of the board, by the numbers of functions you have. Learn the strips up to down, and go left to right, and you'll figure things out. Tip number 2, again, don't worry too much about your panning controls. We really recommend mixing things in mono. We're going to get a lot of flack for that, but we think you're going to sound better, at least in rehearsals and small to medium-sized venues, if your panning controls are typically dead center, not harsh left or right. Again, feel free to, criticize us online. That's just what we feel from a lot of live experience. And tip number 3, roll back the compression a little bit, especially on vocals. Let your vocalist do the dynamic work. That's what they're there for. Hopefully that's what they're getting paid for. So let them experiment with their voice, with microphone placement, close or far, and have their vocals be as expressive as possible, and then add a touch of compression if you need it to control those levels and even things out. Again, too much compression, you're going to start feeding back like crazy, and you're not going to like it. So those are our tips. Get our complete guide to live sound as a downloadable PDF, or read each part individually in the links below. And if you have any questions or harsh criticisms, leave those below, because we know you'll love to do that. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.